All right, we are in the final push. We begin with the episode Penumbra. This is a series of episodes within one story arc to end it, but story arcs with various characters. And I thought the writers throughout these next 8 episodes did a great job of weaving it all together, and it started here. But I have to start with 2 Easter egg minutia points that I thought they were so cool. The first one was when the Defiant docked at Deep Space Nine after having looked for Worf and not found him. I could watch the docking of the Defiant 1,000 times and never gets old. It is so cool to me how they just whip that thing in there and dock it. But the second thing goes back to TOS, the computer, and Nurse Chapel, and Mariette Bartlett, or Majel Bartlett. And her voice is just so crystalline. And as the computer, she speaks in a very clipped manner, not the voice she used for Nurse Chapel or any of the other characters she's played throughout the entire lifespan of Star Trek. But I don't know if Gene was trying to get her some extra money or throw her some extra work way back when. But her as the computer, there were 3 or 4 scenes early on, and they're this long where the computer says something. And I just struck me as how much I love that and how much that, as well as seeing the Defiant dock, is a part of the Star Trek DS9 experience for me. So I had to start with that. But so we have Ezri, and she's either still confused or she's less confused and deciding to explore the boy universe. And
she's not confused. She's 21. We all did it.
And she's talking to Dr. Bashir. Worf has his own thoughts about that. I also loved the scene with Quark at the very start, where Quark's trying to comfort her because Worf was committing a ship that was lost with all hands aboard except 6. And that's who the Defiant and Sisko are looking for. But Quark is just perfect Quark. And the more I see of Quark, but in less scenes or smaller scenes or 30-second scenes or 60-second scenes, actually, the more I love him. And the scene was essentially, oh, he's not leaving. He's not gone. He owes me money. He's not going to Tovacor owing me money. He'll never get in. And if he does get in, he'll know he has a black mark against him forever. And I thought that is so Quark. It's perfect Quark. And it even brought a smile out of Ezri. I really enjoyed that scene. The decision she makes to leave against orders on her own. Sisko's reaction, I thought, was also perfect, which was, I ordered her to come back. I'm glad she didn't, because she never would have forgiven me if I had stopped her. And he's absolutely right. The old man, Jadzia, whatever Dax he was talking to, they might never have spoken to him again. I thought he was spot on there. The scene where Jake says, I'm the one to introduce you to Cassidy, Dad. I thought that was kind of cute, as well as having been a teenage boy once and now a dad, both sides of that. So I thought that was pretty cool. I liked the way they had her follow a logical approach to find Worf, the steps she took. And the other thing that I just loved was the Badlands. Once again, since TOS, we've always had a nebula, or we've always had a Badlands, or we've always had a something where sensors didn't work. And here we were again. And watching it, I don't know if I was watching it on a enhanced DVD or enhanced streaming, but the colors just seem so vibrant to me in the Badlands of the flames jumping out. And I really enjoyed that. Obviously, back to the movie Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where they lose Khan in the nebula, but that's all the way back to TOS as well. That part as well. I like, as I said, the logic she went through to find Worf, the tete-a-tete they have in the runabout, and then a little bit after they crash. I'm not quite sure how I felt about that, but I guess they had to get it out of their system somehow. And then the hookup, naughty. Now you have to tell your commanding officer I'm sleeping with a fellow officer and in a romantic relationship because that's the rules of Star Trek. And then the Breen. I'd forgotten this episode ended with a Breen. And I'd also forgotten what we hadn't met the Breen, I think, until the season before this, season 6, but maybe early part of season 7. But the Breen are really a horrific race. And we see more of the Breen later in other shows, but they are badass dudes. And when you see a Breen, it's time to maybe move on. And they obviously can't because they're captured. But if the Breen are involved, nothing good can come of it. That's where they sort of ended. And I know I probably talked too much about the episode itself, but those little snippets for me were one of the reasons I found this exploration that I've done with you guys on DS9 so great, because they've tied in literally back to TOS, but in a way that even the computer's voice I found exciting and fresh in this episode. And watching the Defiant doc, who gets off on watching the Defiant? Kind of geek does that.
Too good.
Yeah. What about for you guys? Murphy?
Yeah. As soon as you said Defiant, you can watch the Defiant dock anywhere on that ship, but there's something about pulling into those docking ports that I love. That shot in The Way of the Warrior where the Defiant slumps in and docks, and then the panel just immediately turns around the station to reveal this massive Klingon fleet. Yeah, I always like that. When Dukat looks like we got home safe, and they're like brought friends, and you just see this huge armada of warbirds coming at them. It's just a strange episode to start the ending. That cringy moment where Ezri's in the shuttlecraft and she pretends to make staticky noises, and Sisko's, I'm not buying it. I know what you're doing. Yeah, it's like you said, it's the leeway that he lets Dax him with lots of stuff. You want to run off and kill a guy and eat his heart with your 3 buddies I disapprove, but go ahead. Or you want to go hang out with Worf in the jungle and sabotage a mission, that's fine. He does. He gives Dax a lot of leeway. I guess it's kind of necessary. It's got some good moments. I really like this one. I wonder if Dukat gets back on Cardassia. That was a big sticking point for me, because he should be like persona non grata after all this time. How does he get into Dominion headquarters on Cardassia Prime? I don't know. How does he leave Cardassia Prime disguised as a Bajoran? I also have no idea. And yeah, it's neat to see the Breen. And the last time I think we saw the Breen prior to this was the episode where Dukat and Kira go to rescue Zial / murder Zial. And it turns out that the Ravenant, the Cardassian ship that had Zial and her mom on it, was shot down by Breen pirates, and they were using the slaves to mine stuff. But I think that's the earliest we ever see them. And we only see them from the end of the episode. But it's neat that they sort of come back into the arc of the story again. Yeah, I don't know. What'd you think, Coz?
I like this episode. It was very much like it's the beginning of a series. So there was a lot of opening up of different things that were going on. Tom, to your point about the nebula, one of my favorite Voyager episodes is when they're running low on replicator particles and they have to go into a dangerous nebula to fetch some. And Janeway says there's coffee in that nebula. So whenever I see them going into a nebula, I think there's a Worf in that nebula. That's what I thought for this episode. So I really enjoyed that. And I like that as kind of a recurring thing. I loved Jake and Sisko's conversation about Cassidy and the wedding, and then Sisko asking Jake to be his best man. Oh, so sweet, so cute. I do need to point out, and I'm not super proud of knowing this, but the Cassidy and Sisko wedding plot is basically the same as the plot of the Sex and the City movie. So if they want a small, quiet, intimate affair and everything gets way out of hand for reasons largely outside of their control, I thought that was quite amusing. And I think it's going to be really fun to watch going forward. I thought the prophets were really interesting here, the prophet vision that Sisko had about his future. Basically saying in the plainest language they have ever used, you can't do this. You don't get to have this wedding. And I'm wondering how much it harks back to the Sisko is of Bajor, but he cannot return to it. Like, he's been excised from Bajor. So he's got this dream house. He's going to build it. They're going to retire there. It's going to be beautiful. And I was wondering how that could happen when he had been kind of functionally excommunicated from the planet. But now they're saying in the form of his mother, you cannot have this wedding. Her path is not your path. So I thought that was really interesting, and I'm excited to see that play out. I would watch an entire spin-off series of Weyoun and Damar spatting with each other, because they're amazing. Damar's arc is really interesting. I think the way he's going, and he's just He's so plainly out of his element, over his head. And I just, the way he's kind of gone from being this arch villain to just a self-hating guy just trying to get from one day to the next is my take on it. And I find that really interesting. And the founder disease, the changeling, the illness and the link, I think is really fascinating. I won't dive too much into the Ezri Worf thing. You can guess my opinion on that. The lack of chemistry is, everything about it is revolting. I guess it has to be done.
So let me raise a question, or at least a point that I questioned when I watched the episode. And it was around, Megan, the part you talked about with Mother Sarah. And for some period of time, I thought of the creatures in the wormhole as gods, at least gods to the Bajoran. And so when we found out about Mother Sarah, I sort of analogized it to the Greek gods, meaning there was a human father and a god mother, or a godlike mother, or a deity who was a mother, as opposed to maybe Zeus and a mortal woman. And Hercules was half mortal, half god. So I'd been thinking about Sisko in that vein as half deity. But then I thought, no, Tom, that's stupid. They're not gods. This is Star Trek. There are no gods anywhere. They're just different beings, lineal, different beings than us. And that you can have interspecies mating, and obviously Klingon and Ezri, and you can have interspecies births or children. If that part is correct, does it take away from the Bajoran worship of either the prophets or as Sisko as the emissary of the prophets? And I don't pretend to have an answer to that question, but I really wanted to pose that to you guys to get how you thought about this whole relationship now.
Well, Sisko was undoubtedly human. His mother was human, his father was human. She was inhabited by a prophet, but that didn't diminish her humanity. It didn't change her DNA in any way. We see this again and again, going back to that episode, The Reckoning. Kira is inhabited by a prophet because she is a willing vessel, and Kosta Mojin chooses Jake, and they're both inhabited by stuff. There's another episode where, oh my God, why can't I remember her name? Mrs. O'Brien. Keiko gets inhabited by a Pawraith, and it's still Keiko physically, but the Pawraith is, I've taken over your life, and I'm going to do unspeakable things to her unless you blow something up or something. But I think Sisko, in that way, he is human, but his existence is created in this loop by the prophets. Like I said it before, he sort of sets up his own timeline and sets up the eventual possession of Sarah to have him as a child. So he is both in the past and in the future existing simultaneously. So that's his sort of prophet status. He is as close to being a prophet as you could possibly get for a physical entity, by virtue of him being exactly that, nonlinear, which is what the prophets are all about. But I think Sarah views him as a child, her sort of child. Whether or not that's sincere or whether or not that's meant to sort of push the agenda of the prophets forward, we don't know. But the prophets definitely view him as a tool with a purpose, with a little more honorific than that. They see him as a sort of elevated sentient being, as opposed to people like Kai Wing, which they will never acknowledge. There are folks that they will talk to and there are folks that they won't. And Sisko, in terms of anybody in the universe, Sisko is at the top of that list. So he's kin after a fashion, but it doesn't make him prophet. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I'll jump on the idea of, are they gods? Can there be gods? What does that mean in the Star Trek universe? And I wanted to compare it to the Vorta and the Changelings, because they absolutely consider the Changelings to be gods on the basis of their transmutability. The same way the Bajorans consider the wormhole aliens to be gods on the basis of their non-linear status. And there's not a compelling difference between those two use cases, right? Like they're possibly that the Vorta have been more kind of engineered. We don't know how much engineering has happened with the Bajorans. Like they genetically engineered Sisko. but I think it's the
Well,
outcome.
wait a
that
second. They didn't genetically engineer him. They temporally engineered him.
Okay,
They structured
genetically temporarily, yes, but
Yeah.
fair point.
Yeah.
But they're making impacts on their subjects, their worshippers, if you will. And it's the outcome, I think, that matters more than the status. Maybe they're not
Mhm.
actually gods in the universe, but if it looks like a god and it acts like a god, or you treat it like a god, it may as well be a god. So I think there are two kind of races of gods in DS9, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. That is a really interesting point. And it's interesting too, because you say the founders, basically, that story about the founders fixing the Vorta and creating the Jem'Hadar to sort of worship them as gods. It's inconsistent through the series, because there's sometimes, like when the first time they meet the founders, they find this Vorta working like a control panel, and Odo says something to him as a founder, and the guy's just like, "I'll work for you," and he's totally belligerent. And then we see this sort of evolution, and I think there's this thing where when the war heats up, the Jem'Hadar and the Vorta are more pushed into this worshipful corner. And I think that's deliberate on the part of the founders. And I think the same thing, you're right, I think the same thing with Bajor. And the prophets are supposed to be from ancient Bajor, and the one they got's the wormhole we don't know. But that's, to what extent have they molded Bajoran culture? Yeah.
I'd even say that makes sense in wartime when things get stressful. It's what's happening in Canada right now. Canadians have never been more happy to be Canadian and more like into Canadian stuff than when there's like an existential threat. It's probably the same with the Vorta. If you go into wartime, you're going to get a lot more serious about the mores of your culture.
Yeah, I'm seeing Canadian patriotism in Quebec, which is insane. Yeah, it's a little bit.
Let's explore that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't
Never
think that
mind.
much bigger card. But yeah, you have to think of the other things too. How do people look upon the Q?
Point.
Star Trek has it's the Q. And all the retconning that went back, if you look at, Tanya probably know this, but the episode, I think they meet Apollo in TOS. They go to, and he becomes this giant that's hovering over them. And Glenn in, I think it's Squire Gonthos with Nicholas Campbell, or that's it. And he turns, and in the end, he turns out to be this little kid in a playpen. And there's a lot of theories about him being a god or him being a Q or something like that. So it's interesting that these beings are definitely out there and they're just booting around. They talked about this again, not to reference B5, but this is a whole component of B5, is that they have to go on this quest to find the 5 last of the oldest races that existed in the universe. And these things are basically just gods that are hiding on planets that are hidden in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, it's a similar thing. There's a lot of, what's that?
We've got to get Tom to watch B5.
Such an investment. Oh my goodness. Talk about a lore heavy show. That is, so much work.
And maybe we can go around and maybe give some final thoughts. The more in watching the show and then listening to you guys, I really disliked the Ezri Worf part.
Yeah.
But I almost felt like they had to do it. They had to get rid of it or answer it or do something with it, because it was too much of either an open wound or an open question or an open something. I guess we had to do that. But obviously, I just love the deliciousness of this, all of these little quirks and Easter eggs and references that we've talked about. I think this is one of the few episodes that all of the principal cast, to the exception of Garrick, appear in this show. It was just a wonderful start to the arc of the end, and I can't wait to see where it goes, even if I know. Murphy?
Yeah, it's a fun way to start it. I agree completely. The distasteful sort of bad taste in your mouth kind of Ezri Worf thing. Yeah, is because what are you going to do? It was, like you said, it's an open wound. Someone's got to figure something out. But
Yes, I'm sorry. She should have 12.
yeah, he's a pretty bad therapist. But we had to start it off somewhere. We've had episodes like this that have just, you got to do something with it. So yeah, good place to start. I really like Will Yoon in this episode for some reason. There's something about him that I just, maybe it's his weird purple eyes or his really funky haircut. There's something about the Vorta that I just kind of enjoy. I don't know. It's just like their placid demeanor that's just so cold and kind of putting remarks very subtly. Yeah, it's fun watching him sort of annoy Damar with his just like presence. Yeah.
Cool.
Yes, Amelia,
Megan?
almost everything that they opened up in this episode except the Ezri Worf nonsense. I'm excited to see what happens next. I can't wait to see all of the wedding drama. And I can't wait to see what happens with the founder illness. And I'm just excited about all of it. And yeah, just, I guess a last note on the Ezri Worf thing, because it is going to be a thing and she is a main character. I wish they let her be more of her own main character instead of continually pulling back to what had happened before. And if she could have had such this really cool experience of being kind of a reluctant joined twill, and that would have been so interesting to explore, but she's just like Jadzia Part 2 and not a great copy. So I'm sad for that because she could have been awesome. But otherwise, I can't wait for the rest of it. I can't wait to see the whole finale.
Well, just a little cute moment that I just wanted to bring up. I never get sick of this trick that they do with Ben, where something comes up with the emissary and you just look over and there's just a throng of Bajorans kind of gazing at him like a hungry person looks at a turkey. Or they're just mooning over this guy and they're just there like tittering in the background, being like, tee-hee. And just unabashed, weird, shy love that they have for this guy. It's cute. It's cute. It comes up again and again, and I never get tired of it. Anyway, yeah, when he like looks over, he's like, this is not going to be a simple wedding. And all these Bajorans are just pointing at him from the promenade. Just, yeah, it's so cute. Anyway.
Guys, I can't wait to see what we come up with next time.
Yeah, for sure.